working here in Vilnius, Lithuania, on the intersection between public policy and many of the types of questions that we'll be addressing here today. Starting from my left, we have James Waterworth, Vice President Europe for the Computer and Communications Industry Association. Next to him, we have Mr. Augustin Reina, Senior Legal Advisor at a European consumer organization called BEUC. Next to him, we have Chris Sherwood, Head of Public Policy for the Allegro Group. Many of you have heard of that, I'm sure. And continuing along, we have Mr. Michal Motyl, who is from the European Commission's Director General that is known as Connect. We've probably heard about that today. It is the Commission's Director General that handles communication, networks, content, and technology. And last but not least, my fellow countryman, Saulius Jarashiūnas, who's Head of Digital Services at Swedbank, which is a very popular bank here in Lithuania. So welcome, gentlemen, to Vilnius. We have an all-male panel. As you can see, a number of cancellations have prevented gender balance here today. We apologize for that on behalf of the organizers, but we believe that it will be interesting and compelling nonetheless. Probably a good place to start is to at least put out an operating definition of what is a platform. And I'd like to give the first word to Mr. Motyl, because the European Commission, as we know, has been concerning itself with this question, as well as how much regulation and what type of regulation should be applied to this notion of platform. So perhaps you could tell us how you at the Commission understand a platform and what sorts of regulations are being contemplated. Where are we in this process?
Sure. Well, first of all, thank you for the invitation. It's great to be in Vilnius. I brought along 2 slides. Oh, there we go. That's perfect. Just to, the slides serve just to present a number of brands, just to give you a general idea of what we're talking about. I wanted to start with one fun fact. I don't know if I mean, I assume many of you know the movie Back to the Future, and maybe this has been mentioned today already. If so, I apologize for repeating. But the date on which to which they travel in the future is actually in 2 weeks. It's on the 21st of October, 2015. So. It's, you know, there were all sorts of things that were supposed to happen.
Isn't the world supposed to end tomorrow or something before
that? Might be the case. But
well, if we're still here. Yeah.
Yes, we were supposed to have flying cars. We were supposed to have flying skateboards, self-tying shoes, all sorts of things. And as one tech executive recently said, we were promised flying cars, and all we got was 140 characters, referring to Twitter. But I would argue that these 140 characters and many of these things that platforms have brought us are really science fiction. I mean, the fact that 300 million Europeans can connect instantly with any of their or with many of their friends, the fact that I can buy anything I can think of within probably 2 minutes that it will take me to open the app on my smartphone, the fact that I have access to nearly all the world's music and probably most of the world's information instantly, that is quite science fiction that seems quite science fiction to me. So these huge advances have been made largely thanks to these companies that we see on the slide. And so what do they have in common? One thing they do have in common is that they are quite different from a traditional company. And you could say that a traditional company works in a way like a pipe. You have someone who thinks of a product, develops a product, and sells a product. A car company is a good example. And one of the challenges of such a company is that scaling it can be quite expensive because you need to build a new factory, you need to hire new people. Platforms are different. So Uber is the largest taxi company, doesn't own any cars. Airbnb is the largest hotel chain in the world without any rooms. And Amazon sells much more, and Allegro as well, than they keep in their inventory. So platforms don't manufacture goods. They bring together distinct groups of people in a virtual space, and they can do it at a huge scale. They bring together buyers and sellers. They bring together advertisers and the audience. They bring content and readers, music and music lovers, and they provide infrastructure and a certain set of rules for these people to interact. As I mentioned, there are already 300 million Europeans on Facebook. There are 1 million people working in the app economy, so working on apps for one of the two big mobile OSs. That is much more, by the way, than any of the big car companies in Europe. And by the way, if you take the market valuation of nearly the entire European market sector, you take Mercedes-Benz, Volkswagen, BMW, Renault, you add it all up, there are still 3 companies on this slide that are larger than that. So it's a very big phenomenon. And this is only the beginning. So it's very likely that the transformation that we have witnessed will proceed, and I think it's a very good thing.
But you're gonna now say
it's a very good thing, and it's vital, and it's vital for policymakers to understand the implications of this transformation. And so this is why we're asking the stakeholders. We're in touch with both companies, which we see quite often in Brussels, but we wanted to enlarge the group of people we ask. We launched a public consultation asking for feedback from users, from startups, from SMEs, from artists, from anyone who is using or is impacted by these platforms, to help us understand the implications of this transformation, because it's important, and it's important that policymakers fully understand what is happening, how it is impacting Europeans. Mm-hmm. So on the next slide, there's the web address where of the consultation, just to, and I think that's it for my.
And there are opportunities for people to talk to you, basically, yes, via this online application, this survey, which I looked at before today's panel. And I can see that there are all kinds of concerns you have highlighted and you are soliciting information about, ranging from privacy issues to whether certain products are treated preferentially on these platforms versus others, how that all works. Some of the concerns extend to consumer rights, as well as will impact the industry in certain ways. So it's very good today that we have representatives of both consumer interests as well as the industry. And the question is, what do you see from where you sit in the Commission as the main concerns now? You've had the initial consultation has been going on for several months, if I understand correctly, and you've already gotten quite a bit of feedback. What are you hearing from people? So the
consultation was only launched on the 24th of September.
Okay, so 2 months.
So it's fairly recent.
All right.
So I can't give you much feedback on I mean, to be honest, we're still waiting for a.
It is the case that some of the respondents have allowed their responses to be made public. Yes. Is that not correct? So people can access that, and some of the responses are available to look at already. I've seen those as well. But I won't preempt the rest of the conversation by highlighting those. We have people on stage who are competent and willing to discuss some of those concerns. Perhaps we could turn to the representative of the industry, James. Could you mention some of the things that are some of the concerns that the industry has about where this is headed and how you've responded?
Sure. Hi, everybody. My name's James, as was said before, and in case you haven't heard of the name of our association, which almost certainly you haven't, I represent many famous consumer internet brands like eBay and Amazon, Google, Facebook, Netflix, et cetera, et cetera. So you know many of those brands, and we engage with the European Commission and other governments, the Lithuanian government, et cetera, to talk about these issues. And I'm just going to make a very simple and short point about this, which is that it may not be obvious to everyone why we're having this conversation today and why the European Commission is doing this, but the history is somewhat important, and I'll give a short history, which is that, as was said, platforms and internet services have become much more important over the last few years. And this has caused a certain amount of political concern. And actually, a year ago, we weren't having this conversation. So if we'd been having this conference 1 year ago, there definitely wouldn't have been a platform on panels, I'm pretty sure. But this has been put on the agenda of the European Commission by a couple of European governments, particularly France and Germany, who've requested a consultation on this. So we're going to see whether this is actually necessary. I'm skeptical about actually whether there are problems which will need a new legislative approach. I think we've probably got a lot of laws which deal with things which could go wrong, and Agustin may well talk from a consumer perspective, but we have laws which deal with whatever banks or anyone else does on the internet. We have consumer rules, we have privacy rules, we have competition rules, etc., and those just need to be applied to the internet, whether internet services or platforms. So that's the first thing. I'm skeptical about whether we need a whole new set of laws for platforms.
Do you feel that that's in the offing, that that's where this is headed?
There's definitely some political momentum. There's some people who would like to see new rules. Again, we have a push in Europe to only have rules that we really need and not a whole load of European rules that we don't need. So people are going to need to be very careful that we don't introduce rules that we don't need. But actually, the most important point I wanted to make, and I don't know if it's possible to go back to the slide which had all the brands on, because this is quite illustrative of the way this debate has come about. What you'll see on there is every single one of the companies on there is a digital company that was born digital. None of those companies probably existed before the internet, not a single one of them, or maybe Bing, which is Microsoft, but almost every other one existed because of the internet. Platform, however, is an idea which exists well before the internet. So newspapers are platforms, commercial TV stations are platforms, stock exchanges and auction houses are platforms, shopping malls are platforms, and they long predated the internet. And of course, many of these industries are now moving onto the internet as well, so they've become digital platforms. So what's happening in these discussions, and on slides like this, is people become blinded by the digital platforms and forget that every newspaper in Lithuania that used to just print copies and hand them out in a news agency now has a copy on the internet, and that's a digital platform. And I can't see the logo of any newspapers on this slide. And the second example I'm going to give is cars. So 20 years ago, cars were just metal and leather. And they weren't digital at all, and they definitely weren't a platform. You just went and bought a car from Mercedes or whoever it was, and you just had a relationship with them. Cars have very rapidly become digital, and you can already download apps and listen to Spotify and do various things, and they'll rapidly become more digital, which means that the car sits between you, the driver, and various applications, which means the car is a platform, a digital platform. And I don't see the logo of Mercedes-Benz or Volkswagen or Renault on this slide. So what we're going to need to think about is, can we have platform regulation when the needs of cars and newspapers and stock exchanges and search engines are so different one from the other? I'm not completely convinced about that.
Well, if I could follow up, James, I think one of the concerns, obviously, that arises is the dominating nature of some of the platforms that exist, and that the huge amount of influence that they have on the types of information that is accessible to us, and who is in charge of that and based on what principles. You're suggesting you're questioning whether there might be a need for new regulation. Can you talk about some of the existing regulations that you think already cover this? Are they adequate for this new world that we're in?
Sure. I mean, we're seeing all the time courts and governments adapting their rules to the internet. So you talked about data. The European Union has been discussing for the last 5 years new data rules which govern everything from these digital brands to car companies and banks and everybody else. It's appropriate to adapt those rules to the internet age, absolutely, and that applies to everybody. We had a judgment by the top court in Europe last week about rules for transferring data outside of the European Union. That is evolving the way we look at these things. So we have rules. They're being actively used by courts and by lawyers and by governments, and I remain to be convinced that there are gaps in those rules. They need to be enforced the right way, but are there gaps? I'm not sure.
Okay, Augustine, you represent consumers.
Yeah.
Do you see this differently? Do we need new,
some point,
improved regulations? What do, are the ones that exist adequate?
I would agree with James, and this is mainly because we have a very, very extensive set of rules at EU level. The question is, are they properly implemented? Are they enforced? Who is there to ensure that all these rules that we have in place, they're applicable? And when we talk about a platform, it's a very vague concept. What is a platform? Do we have to establish, a specific regulation for platforms? Where, as we said, we can even look at the previous slide, and there are different type of business models, and each business model they have their own problems and benefits and consumers' concerns. So, when I was just hear about platforms, saying, okay, what are the consumer concerns in relation to platforms? And then thinking a little bit to say, okay, maybe we can group them within a common pattern and think, for example, we have competition issues. We have, for example, the European level, an extensive set of rules on EU on antitrust, but also the possibility for the Commission to start action. Then we have also consumer law at European level, which is a very, very extensive. It's been 25 years that we were developing consumer law, but consumer law for the physical world. So the question is, the challenge is how to adapt this now to the digital environment and make them applicable. The same happened with data protection. And if I can stop on the issue of this panel, this competition. Of course, in the digital environment, for a platform or a company or intermediary, however you want to call it, it's much easier to become dominant. And that entails, of course, certain responsibilities for the company and also for the market players and the enforcers. We have, for example, the case there is an ongoing investigation in relation to Google, but it's not only about a company with a specific dominant position, but also how works competition in different distribution channels. In the previous panel, there was a very interesting discussion about copyright. The fact that, for example, here in Lithuania, you don't have access to certain platforms, despite the fact that they are available in other European countries. Under EU competition law, that will be illegal. They cannot block you from accessing, this content, but this is allowed under copyright laws. So the question is, looking at the overall legislative framework and try to identify whether there are gaps, right, where there are issues that need to be fixed, and most important, what still needs to be enforced.
So what are some of the key concerns on behalf of consumers? Where do you see gaps? That is the key question, of course. Do we have gaps? But where do you see them?
Legislative gaps. We have enforcement gaps, I would say, yes, especially when it comes to the enforcement of
Can you specify, can you give us a few examples of
those? Yeah, of course. If we think about, as I said previously, a Lithuanian consumer that cannot access a video streaming platform that is available in the UK. Under EU competition law, it wouldn't be allowed for that platform to not allow the consumer accessing that content when he or she tries to access it from outside what is called the exclusive territory. For example, take the UK. But this is something, for example, the Commission is looking at within its enforcement powers, but this is something that it's allowed under copyright rules. So the same in the European legal framework, we have a law which says that this is not allowed, or this would be illegal, and in other part of legislation, this is legal.
So the legislation is conflicting with itself.
It's conflicting, and there is a long story of the European Court of Justice judgments, trying to fix, this discrepancy between copyrights and competition rules. If we talk about, for example, consumer law, as I said before, consumer law have been developed, for the last 3 decades for the physical world. But for example, what happens if you buy an app from an app store, and then the app becomes defective or causes a damage to your hardware or software? Can you claim for damage, for example? Can you get your money back? So we don't have, at EU level at least, and we have only in 2 member states, some laws that specifically deal with these questions. So here we have a gap, for example, in legislation, which relates basically to how to make consumer law applicable to the digital environment.
Chris, are these concerns that users express? Do you hear this from consumers as well?
Well, it's very interesting that you use the word users. So if you think about an e-commerce platform like ours, we have users who are buyers and users who are sellers. And to us, there is not necessarily a difference. The very same people are both buyers and sellers sometimes. And what our people certainly want is the ability to engage in online trade in a free manner. And one of the things which holds them back from doing that is when the platform itself is unable to provide the enabling function that it has. And that happens, for example, when the platform is made legally responsible for what it is that people do on the platform. There's a great example here in the Baltic region with Delphi, which is a company which has a stand just out here in the hallway, a publishing company with strong operations in Lithuania but also Estonia, and there was a big European Court of Justice judgment which held that Delphi as a publisher is an intermediary and a platform, but is actually responsible legally for some of the comments that are made by users on its website. And if those comments are judged to be somehow illegal, then Delphi is held responsible. Now, in an offline reality, that may be something which is possible, but in an online reality where the platform is trying to be an enabler of debate, or an enabler of trade, or an enabler of driving around, or whatever it is that the platform is enabling, you need to be able to develop scale, large scale, to be able to do lots of it in an inexpensive way. And if the platform is made responsible for everything that happens that its users do on the platform, you end up having to employ large numbers of people to check every piece of content, and you end up censoring people's economic activity, censoring their freedom of speech, and you end up with platforms which are much less powerful and therefore much less beneficial to the people who use them. So the issue of intermediary liability is a major problem.
Mm-hmm. Mikael, where do you see the Commission's role in these types of questions? Should the Commission get involved on these issues? Is it not risking censoring legitimate debate and squelching advances in online business?
Yeah. I'm going to pick up on that point. I
Please.
just wanted to mention the copyright issues and the contract law issues, which I think are, I mean, I share your views that they do block, they are a major stumbling block, and they are being addressed under the DSM. I mean, there is a debate about the reform to the copyright and also kind of harmonizing the contract law so that people are, in particular in reference to digital goods. Now, coming back to the issue of intermediary liability, basically the liability of platforms for the content that they present, I think we have to weigh two interests here. Yeah, two main interests. One is the interest of platforms to be able to grow, and the other is the interest of for example, owners of copyright. And let's imagine a scenario where you earn your living as a musician, and you make money basically from showing a music video or selling your music, because this is how musicians make money, and you find this piece of work being shared among millions of people. You contact the platform, and they say, "Well, it's not our responsibility." You know, so it is a tricky issue. And I think that the platforms have to do their bit. And there are some, I mean, for example, YouTube, that we have seen. they have found technical ways of dealing with these questions. So it's not technically impossible.
Do you think that any of this type of regulation threatens innovation? Are there things that the Commission might do that would actually inhibit the growth that we're hoping for? To harken back to the name of the panel, or do you think that the Commission is more interested in advancing it, and how would it advance it? How would it make sure that regulations advance and don't inhibit innovation?
I think we as the Commission have to be always aware of the risk of that any piece of regulation can harm innovation. That is definitely not our aim. I think the internet and the whole digital ecosystem has to remain vibrant. We hope that this is going to be the source for European prosperity, for European jobs. 60% of European growth is dependent on innovation, basically, and so if the Commission's or any government's mandate is ultimately to provide growth and jobs, we cannot do things that inhibit that. So there's always, I think we always have to be mindful of that, and we are.
Solo, the growth of online banking, one of the biggest conveniences from the standpoint of the consumer in all of this digital revolution. Do you feel like you have the environment you need in which to develop online banking as a business? And do you see it evolving further, or do you see any limitations on the horizon?
Well, we run one of the most popular platforms in Lithuania. It's Internet Bank, and almost half of the nation use it. And to be honest, we are very heavily regulated with all kinds of regulators, central banks, other authorities, and I don't see that, at least from the banking perspective, that there is any more room for regulating it from another side. But I would like to mention and maybe highlight the sort of new generation platforms from the financial world. For example, peer-to-peer lending, social investing, and virtual currencies. And those platforms are not regulated at all. And the consumer, I guess, is not ready to take the risks that those platforms present. So we, from the banking side, we are really running very safe platforms. Is it Internet Bank or mobile app or any other platform that we are developing? But sort of in the wild, you can see quite a lot of platforms that are, of course, in the very early stage, but they can pose some risks, and it's interesting how they are going to be regulated. And they will always be probably running ahead of regulation, because all these new ideas, of course, they inspire the innovation, and sometimes we can learn something from them as well. But yes, we are very restricted in.
Well, let me follow up on that very last point that you made, because in many ways, those of us who engage in business sometimes think of regulation as a burden. Does it help in any way, this regulation? Does it help the consumer trust the service that you're providing? Is there what's the good side to this regulation, or is it more of a hindrance? Do you feel like it is more of a burden, or what aspects of it are burden, what aspects of it might be helpful?
Well, I think we have to play with existing rules, and of course it's beneficial to our customers, and we are happy for them. And we have equal game rules, so to say. That is as well important. So we have the same rules for all the industry, and we have to follow them.
Chris, you wanted to chime in?
Yeah, so I'd like to be provocative and bring this debate
Please,
to
everyone's
life
being
a
so
little bit.
polite. We have such a strong panel here. We
But
could
at
have some
this
really good
morning's
arguments.
opening session, the guy from Google said something which I absolutely agree with. He said, we have to be willing to accept change and look at change. And you just said we have to work within existing rules. No, we don't have to work within existing rules. Let's take online payments, okay? There are companies like, there's a Swedish payments company called Klarna, which is doing amazing things with online payments. And They are more convenient, more exciting, easier to use than a lot of heavily regulated banking industry payment systems today. Now, it is unfair that the banking industry is under those existing rules. Sure, it's unfair, but isn't the answer to remove the regulations on the existing systems and allow systems, new ones which are trust-based, which are based on, for example, user reviews, whether it's BlaBlaCar or Allegro or whatever, where you actually see, you can actually crowdsource information about the trustworthiness of the system? Isn't that better than sticking with old existing regulatory systems?
Don't get me wrong, I was not saying that there is no room for innovation and for overthinking. As we have developed, for example, in Swedbank, very convenient mobile app where you can have the person-to-person payments, small amounts, you don't need additional authorization codes, very convenient. So we are as well looking into all possibilities how to make our tools easier to use and more widely used. So there is room to innovate.
Yeah. But to be fair, there are these cases such as banking where you have an established industry that is being regulated heavily, as you say, and then you have upstarts that may be a disruptive competition in terms of changing the whole market that seem relatively unregulated right now. It seems to me that there are some arguments floating around that, well, we have to really get on the ball. We have to start leveling the playing field in this regard. So perhaps we need to rethink the regulations. James, you said you think existing regulations cover it. I will come back to you, and then I'd like to hear from Augustine after that about the consumer view of this.
They might not always cover it, but many existing regulations cover it today. But the thing I think we have to bear in mind about new services and pushing the frontiers is the following. Someone said to me recently that, or to the group I was in, the change you have just experienced is the slowest you will ever experience. In other words, it's going to get quicker and quicker and quicker and quicker. And that's hard enough for us all to cope with in our jobs or whatever we're studying. And will we still have a job in 20 years' time? And what the hell are we going to do? It's very hard for governments to cope with in terms of the rules they come up with. So whether it's peer-to-peer, whether it's banking system, the only thing that's sure is if you pass a new rule today, in 5 years' time, it'll broadly be irrelevant because the rule you're passing today is on what you already know. It's on what happened yesterday and the day before, and it's getting faster. So I think one of the big challenges is how are we going to do this in the future? How are supranational governments, like, supranational authorities like the Commission, how is the Lithuanian government going to do this? And how are they going to avoid making the wrong decisions? And I think one of the big challenges is, coming back to this trust thing, is we've relied in the past on big banks, for example, to ensure that they've got enough credit in the bank such that if there's a financial crisis, things go wrong. We saw what happened there. We've relied on central banks to make decisions. We've relied on authorities to have more information. What changed with the internet in the last 20 years is that you all in the room have as much information as the authorities. In fact, probably more, and you know how to use it better. So there's this big question of can the Ministry of X in Lithuania still be the best informed and the best place of regulating the taxi industry or the hotel industry or whatever? And the answer is almost certainly, alone, no.
So can we speculate a little bit on what an adequate answer would be? Because it doesn't sound like you were saying that there should be no regulation at all. But at the same time, if regulation is chasing this thing that's evolving away from it, if, as I read, the Commission won't be making decisions on this until next year, meanwhile, 5 new developments may cause the consultations to become outdated themselves, right?
I think you've got to do 2 things. Firstly, everyone in this room and everyone in society is going to be a participant in controlling things. Chris talked about internet platforms. If you use platforms like YouTube or eBay or whatever it is, people are familiar with, if you see something that's wrong, you flag it and you tell the platform, that's wrong, there's a problem here, there's something illegal going on. So we're going to have new systems for stopping infringements, which will be more social than they've been in the past. But the second thing, and where we have formal regulation rather than self-regulation is going to be flexibility. So if we pass a new rule tomorrow, we need to allow the courts and the judges, who can come to a decision relatively more quickly than a government, to interpret the rules and make sure the rules are flexible enough to cope with tomorrow's innovation. If we try and anticipate everything that could go wrong in terms of consumer protection or competition, we'll simply fail. And we'll have to come up with a new law, and then we'll be late and we'll miss it again. So law has to be flexible.
And possibly also limiting innovation, I would imagine.
There is a danger that by passing law you limit innovation because you prohibit people from doing things, or you discourage people from doing things.
Or you frame things a certain way, and there may be other ways to frame them. Augustine.
Exactly, and the question is, why all these platforms became so popular? Simply because people, consumers, they fed up with the traditional industries. Why Uber is so popular? Why eBay became so popular at the beginning? Because it gives something to the consumers that they didn't have before. They didn't find it in the traditional industry. So the question really is that not preventing, as you say, preventing innovation, giving good stuff to people, but it has to be done also in a framework that the consumer feels safe in relation to their personal data, feels safe in relation to their physical integrity, that they're covered in case of damages, all these kind of things. But what is mostly interesting, or all this debate around platforms, and particularly around the liability of the intermediaries, is that it has nothing to do with the consumer or consumer safety.
Okay.
It's exclusively about copyright, exclusively about right holders, because this is the issue in the e-commerce directive, which regulate intermediaries. So what are the responsibility of the intermediaries, for example, to identify harmful content or third party, or what is the relationship in relation to third party content. And this legislation has been very, very important for the development of this platform. But the copyright industry have been always very, very aggressive toward this, because it's allowed people to share, to share content. Sometimes this content, it's copyrighted, and then the platform will have the responsibility, to take it down through a proceeding that is in place, and actually the legislation mandates, to establish it. So the question is that in all this discussion, has the consumer a role to play, or is driven by other interests?
So it sounds like what you're saying is this regulation that purports to protect consumers is much more focused on protecting content owners or creators than the consumers, actually, than in helping consumers get what they want.
It's all about that. It's all about consumer protection. We have specific laws, and we are developing these laws. And you can look in different sectors according to the activity of the platform. If you want to look at the accommodation like Airbnb, well, you have to look at the specific legislation that applies to, for example, renting or hotels, these kind of things. About how it can be transposed or implemented to the specific sector. The same applies with consumer law horizontally. We have legislation about unfair terms, unfair practices. Really assessing how this applies to protect consumers when they interact with platforms and with the individuals or other consumers or companies that operate through the platforms. But when we talk about the e-commerce directive, it's about third-party content.
Okay.
And then the elephant of the room is the right holders.
If I could ask Michal to respond to that, what is the Commission doing for consumers? We have a representative who's saying that they want good stuff.
Yeah,
they
sure.
want it to be trustworthy, but they see the focus not really on consumers.
Yeah, so I think what the Commission is currently doing under the DSM is we're trying to create a digital single market. We're trying to ensure that copyrighted content from one member state can be accessed from another member state. That's what we're doing. We're not looking at the strength of copyright protection as it is right now, and I think it is a big debate to be had between, and I see the need for that as well, between consumers and content makers. I mean, if we had a musician on the panel or a filmmaker, I think their views would be possibly different, because that's how they earn their money. I take James's point on the necessity of governments to adapt to regulation. I think to adapt to technology change. I think with the platforms consultation, I mean, the result might be that the Commission will simply do nothing, because it will turn out that, first of all, there are no problems where we have been told by some stakeholders that there are. Maybe the result will be deregulation, because maybe it is unfair in the end to regulate a bank and not regulate a peer-to-peer lending platform. And maybe these peer review mechanisms are as reliable as regulation, but maybe not. And this is something we have to see, whether consumers trust peer review, whether it's whether you can tamper with it, whether
it works.
Whether it works. Yeah.
Augustine wanted to respond, then we'll go to Chris, and then we'll open it up to the audience.
Yeah, so, on this last point about the deregulation, I really not encourage you to go through the road of the deregulation, especially in the banking sector. I apologize. But regulation is important, because it gives the tools, to the enforcers to try to find, fairness in the different markets, allow people to access content, allow people to access product. But what is important here is that it was mentioned before, is the whole discussion goes around the issue of copyright, And what we have really to think is that copyright currently in Europe, in the world, is a one-side concept. So the consumer doesn't play a role there. Despite the fact they're the one that are subsidizing the industry, they pay for the content.
Well, you know how the argument goes, that you won't have this amazing content if we don't protect
absolutely, and we need
rights
to
of the
protect them. It's not that we are anti-copyright. Copyright's important, and most important, authors have to be remunerated, But between the consumer who pays and the author, there is a whole range of different actors, that everybody takes a little piece of the cake, And these same actors are the ones saying, but we also want a piece from YouTube. We also want a piece from this other platform, Okay, it's business. But then, if we're going to look at the whole chain, then we also have to assess, what is the roles of these different parties that intervene, and what is in there for the consumer and for the author, which is ultimately the one we want to protect.
Okay, Chris.
Yeah, so let's talk about actual examples. We're talking about consumers from today's generation, which I call Generation D, Generation for Data and Digital. Generation D in, say, online payments, what do they want? Generation D wants safety and convenience. They want to be able to pay safely and conveniently. What the law says is, yes, you should be able to pay safely, and this is the way to do it. You need to have strong authentication, which means that you should have two-factor authentication. You should be providing a PIN number, and so. No, the law should be saying you need to provide safe and convenient authentication for your transactions to a particular level of risk, perhaps, but not telling you the technological mechanism that you need to be implementing it. Let's talk about accommodation, hotels, Airbnb. Generation D wants to go and stay in nice places, conveniently, safely, and for a good price. What the regulation of hotels says is, well, when you stay somewhere, you need to stay in this type of accommodation. It has to be blah, 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 blah. It's all detailed about how you achieve the objective rather than what the objective is. We need regulations which are focused on objectives rather than the means to achieve them.
Yes, and of course, there's the famous Uber example, which will be competing with taxis, and we have regulations here that say a taxi has to have an actual meter that measures inside the car where you're going. I'd like to take some questions from the audience, which is why I'm stepping away from the stage. It's very bright, and I can't see you when I'm up there. So, who would like to address some questions to our panel? And perhaps we could have someone take a microphone to the members of the audience. Is there anyone? Do I see someone back there? This is your chance to address. We have a remarkable panel here that's ready to take your questions on platforms. How many of you are users. I would imagine everyone in the room is a user of a platform in one way or another. Do any of you feel that you're not getting what you would like, or what are your concerns when you're using platforms? Do you feel that these platforms are meeting your needs? Are you worried about privacy issues, for example? Some of these platforms collect information about you. There are those who say that there should be greater oversight of the type of information that the platforms are collecting about you. Then there are others who would say it's up to you to, in interaction with the developers of the platforms, to work that all out. Oh.
You can reply to your
It's
consultation.
time for a consultation. Oh, good. Please.
Hi, my name is Guada. It's nice to see an all-male panel up here. Good that we have some women talking about platforms as well.
Thank you.
Yes, my input towards that. I really like what Chris said in terms of the regulation is focusing on the very detailed ideas on what is safe and what is acceptable to a certain country or supranational entity. And I was wondering whether it is not the consumer that is actually pushing the governments to say what is actually safe and what kind of standard is there. And whereas the disruptive technologies, I think that they're using a lot of the weaker or under-regulated spots that they can make things easier and faster, whereas the over-regulated institutions, they cannot make innovations as quickly. And I would like to hear your thoughts about that.
Great questions. Who would like to start?
I can go if you like.
James, please.
They are really good questions. So, and there were several, and I think the first part was, are consumers pushing the governments to do some of those things? And given that I'm a lobbyist, and I can smell normally what's going on behind the scenes, I think the answer is probably no very often. It's probably someone who's being disrupted. But I think on your second point, which is disruptors going for a less regulated point and existing players being in a more regulated space, there's some merit in that, of course, because some people who want to disrupt a particular market would be a bit stupid if you wanted to have a financial markets product to go up against Swedbank that has a big brand, lots of capital, a branch network, and sophisticated employees. It's probably going to be pretty hard. So you're going to have to try and be nimble and do something much more funky and try and find a way of breaking into the market, which may also mean trying to do something which is a little bit less regulated. Certainly shouldn't be outside the law, but less regulated and gives you more space to act. That doesn't, of course, prohibit Swedbank, sorry to pick on you the whole time, but an established bank, sitting on the panel, from also doing that. So Swedbank, there's nothing stopping Swedbank doing the classic banking services it does today and going and doing a peer-to-peer financial transaction service. It's just typically that's not the way big companies work because they've become big companies.
Is that true, though, Solo, that there's nothing stopping you from doing exactly what peer-to-peer lending startups are doing?
Well, maybe I don't want to talk about this particular example. It's a lot regarding as well regulations, but in our areas we are working on quite a lot of innovative projects. For example, we are working on new identification means that as well is very important not only for the banking industry but for other industries as well, because if we would have a sort of a single identification tool that could be based on, say, mobile application and it could be widely adopted, we could benefit everyone. All industries could benefit from that. So we have a lot of ideas and we are working on quite innovative products. This particular example, I wouldn't like to comment. It's and it is very, very heavily regulated. So lending is the area where we have very strict rules and we follow those.
Back to Chris's remark about regulation getting too technical. If I could ask Solis just to respond real quickly on that, do you feel like, you point out that you're one of the most regulated types of online services. Is it too technical, as Chris describes it? Do they get too much into your business and not allow you to develop new ways of doing things that might be just as safe or even safer?
Well, I think it is getting technical. Sometimes there is some room to really to agree on a ways. Maybe it's not particular wording, or you don't have to follow exactly. It doesn't say exactly how it should be, but it is getting pretty technical. But I don't think that this is the sort of the showstopper for making things easier. And as I gave an example, for example, these simple payments, we already have this in place, so you don't really need to enter your additional codes or anything. You just authenticate once, and then you can make simple, small payments to your friends or colleagues, and that works perfectly. So there is really some space.
Chris, you had a remark.
Yeah, I'd just like to turn the question back to you. I mean, do you trust the online platforms that you use today?
Well, I think that the answer really depends on the platform itself, no? I mean, as a consumer, you tend nowadays to lack actual ability to evaluate whether the platform is safe or not. And that's another issue where you actually have to work a lot with the environment that you're in. Because as a consumer and not as a technical person, I have no idea whether, tracking cookies or anything else are being done on my phone and my computer and all other things. Of course, the older systems, such as banks, which are super heavily regulated, they are under such spotlight that they don't really have much room to maneuver into wrong decisions to a certain degree. Of course, not mentioning the kind of, big, huge manipulation, black boxes and investment, etc., that again come to the point where the consumer doesn't really understand what the scheme is. And I think that a lot of it is actually driven by the over-regulation and by the cornering of companies, where they actually have to come up with these intricate schemes and then not be able to kind of simplify things. So that's the short answer.
Because I would argue that that of course there are some companies that which offer services, platforms that you sort of have to use because there aren't that many alternatives out there. And I'm thinking of my favorite social network. Where are my friends? They're all on this particular social network. But at the same time, I think if I really didn't trust them, I just wouldn't use them. I think overall, these are companies which are built on trust, and I tend to use services which I trust and not use services that I don't. Now, I don't think that's necessarily enough to do everything based on crowdsourcing trust. If you look at the banking sector and what happened in the financial collapse, these are companies that took risks which were unacceptable in terms of their systemic importance. And we're talking about that in terms of cybersecurity laws and other things, and maybe we should talk about that in the context of platform regulation in general, trying to regulate systemic risks of confidence in the system. But in general, I think the growth rate of use in these digital platforms indicates that in general there's a very, very high level of trust in the market in these platforms.
Mm-hmm. Augustine?
Yeah. I will tend to disagree on that last point with you, Chris, and I will strongly agree with you. By the way, spot on, you should come and work for us. The thing is that, of course, trust is important. A consumer that trusts on a platform, makes this platform popular and makes consumers happy because they're happy using it. But which doesn't justify that the platform have not to comply with certain standards that exist either in the law or on other through other sources. So if we take, for example, the case of the favorite platform, the favorite social network, everybody, Facebook. We have, for example, many of our members, they are suing Facebook because of data protection infringement or under or consumer law infringements, or different grounds, not because of the sake of suing them and getting them out of the market. On the contrary, consumers like Facebook, and that's a great thing because it allows you to connect with people, to stay in touch. But it doesn't justify that they don't have to comply with the law. And if they're targeting the things that we have different regulatory concepts in the US and in the EU, but the fact that if you operate in the EU, you have to play according to European rules.
Sure. I mean, probably all of us have had our moments with the social networks where they switch some feature and you're just rolling your eyes and hitting face palming yourself before you figure out how to turn it off. But those are those cases where. But as Chris says, we're still on it. It seems it's not so bad that we would just ditch it. If it's that bad, then maybe it's enough if people just leave if they get fed up with it. James, you had something to say?
I was just going to say one comment on what Augustine was just saying. One of the differences, very important differences, in terms of enforcement and rules in the internet era and with internet services in comparison to the pre-internet, is it's much easier for consumers or consumer organizations or anyone in this room to find out if someone's doing something wrong. It's much easier. 25 years ago, before the internet, it would have been a nightmare to understand what a bank was doing or a car company was doing. Now think how quickly information spreads, and one person says this, the next person says that, the next person corrects this, and we have a global discussion going on about the car industry currently, enabled because of the internet. And some of the information will be rubbish, some of it will be accurate, but ultimately we'll have an understanding which is pretty quick. So the ironic thing with Facebook is it enables people to compare what they might be doing wrong or not very, very quickly.
Absolutely, and that's the great thing, And it's not that we are against, the concept. These platforms, have provided a huge added value to the society as a whole. As you said, you can learn things like this, that before you have to go and buy the newspaper. So they are important for a society, but it doesn't mean, that they don't have to comply with the rules.
Right, and there are inevitably going to be such cases where the platform is much more powerful than any individual user, and things, as we know, that once they're out on the internet, it can be very difficult to pull them back. We had a discussion over lunch today about the right to be forgotten, and can you, as an individual user, do you have enough power to persuade a platform to remove information about you that shouldn't be there, maybe even legally? I'm sure you've run into this as well, Augustine, on behalf of consumers.
The right to be forgotten, that's a big elephant. Indeed, it's part of one European right that you have as a data subject, to be able to rectify, and ask to certain content to be removed. Of course, you have to balance that in relation to other fundamental rights, like the freedom of expression, and this is what the European Court of Justice try to find a balance. It's always a balancing exercise, You have to balance between different fundamental rights. You have to balance between economic rights, different parties, consumers, right holders, platform. The whole thing is a balancing exercise, What is difficult is to try to find the right balance,
I think that's a perfect note on which to end our discussion today. Let's join me in thanking the panel. It's been an honor and very interesting. I would like to make a few announcements on behalf of the organizers that they've asked me to make as soon as I locate it here. All right, now here's the first announcement. In Hall 4.2, we will be able to hear a short keynote speech by Mr. Mikael Damberg, who is the Minister for Enterprise and Innovation of Sweden. And he's visiting Lithuania this week together with the royal visit of the King and Queen. As a result, the next presentation on big data and data mining by IBM will be starting in this room at 4:45 or 16:45 for those of you who use that form of timekeeping. I would also like to remind you, please check out hashtag SwitchVilnius, tag us in your pictures, send your comments and questions, and hopefully those will become topics for future discussions. Thank you very much.